Masechet Avoda Zara Daf Kaf Gimel. Yesterday we saw a contradiction between the Mishnah and a Baraita. The Mishnah said that one may not entrust his animal to a non-Jewish innkeeper because we suspect the goy is going to commit bestiality, and we can't put them in that situation of lifnei iver. So that means that goyim are suspect of the sin. But then we saw a Baraita that said one is permitted to buy an animal for a sacrifice from a non-Jew. And now if it was involved in sin, then it would not be eligible to be used for a sacrifice. So according to the Baraita, we do not suspect that non-Jews commit this terrible sin. So we have a contradiction. The Mishnah says we do suspect them. The Baraita says we do not suspect them. How do we answer the question? So we already gave one answer. The first answer was that depends if they own it or not. If they own the animal, then they're not going to sin with it because it's not good for the animal. It will become barren. It will become weak. But if it doesn't belong to them, and so the Jew entrusts an animal with them, then they are going to sin with it. That was one answer. But now we're going to propose a couple of other answers. Ravina Amar La Kashya Halechatechila Hadiabad. Ravina said that the Mishnah that said, do not entrust an animal with them, that's Lechatechila. Don't, who knows? Maybe we suspect them of it, so therefore don't entrust them with it. But if they already have the animal and if they already have the animal in their possession, and now you bought it, it's okay, you can use it. We don't, avad, if it's already done, then we do not suspect that the non-Jew sinned with it. And where can we find a precedent that we make a distinction between lechetechila and di'avad in a case that's like this, where do we suspect the non-Jews of something or not? Oh, we have a precedent in a similar case. Ditnan lo titjached isha mahem ipnei shechashudin ala arayot. The Mishnah says, this is a clause in our Mishnah, it's also found in Masechet Ketubot. It says that a married Jewish woman should not be alone with non-Jews because they don't care about the problem of adultery. And so this would be, yichud is prohibited even for between a Jewish woman and a Jewish man. But here it's even if the non-Jewish couple is there. But still, they wouldn't care, and they might take this woman who's married, and therefore she should not be alone with the non-Jews. So if the Mishnah says that one does suspect goyim of illicit relations, but we have a contradiction. Would mean who ha'isha shenichbesha bidei goyim aide mamon mutet leba'ala aide nefashot asura leba'ala. Says if a Jewish woman was captured by non-Jews, if it's because of money, she, or her husband owes money to whatever the government, and they imprison her until he pays up. So now we're going to be afraid. Is she prohibited? Did she sin? Was she abused in prison? So we say if she was arrested because of a monetary payment, then we assume the captors left her alone, and therefore even if the husband is a kohen, he can take her back. However, if she was arrested for a capital offense, doesn't matter true or not, it's some government, whatever, they arrested her on a capital offense, then we assume that the captors did rape her. And if somehow she goes free and her husband is a kohen, she is prohibited to him. So the question is from the first part of the Baraita, where it says that a woman who is captured by these non-Jewish authorities, she is permitted to be with her husband, meaning we do not suspect that the non-Jewish captors are going to abuse her. And so this is a contradiction. The Mishnah said, we do assume that they will sin, and the Baraita says we do not assume that they will sin. So how could we resolve this? Rather, the answer must be that we make a distinction. A woman should not willingly go and be in seclusion with non-Jews. That's the lechatechila. B'di'avad, she was captured, she was imprisoned against her will. What do you want her to do? Then b'di'avad, now she got out. We do not suspect her that anything happened. We do not suspect that the non-Jews abused her, and therefore she is permitted to her husband. So just like in the case of a woman, we make a distinction between lechatechila and b'di'avad. So too, we can use that as an answer for the animals, and lechatechila, do not entrust your beast with these innkeepers. But b'diavad, if you want to buy something from them, you can buy it and you can use it for if they already have it, then you can buy it and use it for a korban. So doesn't that's a good proof? And we say no, maybe not. Mimai dilma leolam emalach afilu diavad amila. V'hacha hainu tamad mitzareh mishum hefsed mamono. No, maybe in fact even b'diavad one cannot trust that the non-Jews did the right thing. No, we have to assume they did the wrong thing. And here the only exception is if they captured her for money, and so because they want the husband to pay, they are going to keep her safe. They're not going to abuse her because they're afraid that if the captors are afraid if they rape her, then the husband is going to be less interested in redeeming his wife and paying up. Oh, look, she's already prohibited to me. Let's say he's a kohen. So she's already prohibited to me, and now I have to pay this much money. Okay, you know what? Forget about it. Yeah, you want her, take her. You want to let her go? Let her go. I'm not paying. So because the captors, their primary interest is to get paid. So they're not going to lose out on the possibility of getting paid. So they will protect her and not rape her. That's an exceptional case. But otherwise, we see that they are suspected. Teda dekatani sefa al yedin nefashot asura lebaala vetulamidi. We even see that this is true in the continuation of that baraita. Says if the Jewish woman is captured on capital offense, so now there's no reason for the captors not to rape her because they're just going to kill her anyway. So and they don't care. They don't need the husband to pay or not pay. So then we do suspect them. So you see that's the b'diavad, and nevertheless we do suspect them. If she somehow gets out and goes free, then we say that she is prohibited to her kohen husband. And so we see that in this Mishnah regarding a woman, there's not necessarily a distinction between lechatechila and diavad, and therefore there's no precedent from here. There's no proof that for making such a distinction. Okay, so there's no proof. Ravina still says that this is an answer to it, but he's not going to have backing from that issue of a woman that we can compare it to the case of bestiality. Rabbi Pedat has another way of resolving the contradiction. This is the Mishnah that says, do not entrust an animal with the non-Jewish innkeeper. That's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who's stringent about this. And the Baraita that says you can buy a sacrifice, that's the opinion of Rabbanan. Now what do they say? Titnan, gabe parat chatat. Rabbi Eliezer omer ena nikachat min hagoyim achamim matirim. Ma'ila b'haka mipalged. Rabbi Eliezer sabar, chashinan l'Rabbi'ah. V'Rabbanan sabre, lai chashinan l'Rabbi'ah. The Mishnah in Masechet Parah says, regarding a para aduma animal, you have to acquire it from somewhere. And Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot acquire it from non-Jews. And Chamim say, it's okay, you can acquire it from a non-Jew raises a nice, beautiful red cow. You can acquire it from them and use it for para aduma. Now, what's the reason for their machloket? Are they not arguing about the following? That Rabbi Eliezer thinks that we suspect that the non-Jews are going to commit bestiality with it, and once you do that, can't be used as a para aduma anymore. Therefore, you can't get it from non-Jews. You have to get it from a Jewish farmer. Whereas Rabbanan say, no, we don't worry about it. And so the Mishnah that says don't entrust, that's Rabbi Eliezer, who's stringent about that. And the rabbis who say, it's okay, you don't have to worry that they're going to commit bestiality. That would be the Baraita, who also say that you can buy an animal for a sacrifice from non-Jews. Mimai, and then we reject this. Is that true? Not necessarily. Dilma dekula amala chashina l'Rabbi'ah. Maybe, in fact, everybody in this Mishnah does not suspect any problem of bestiality. Hacha hainu tamad Rabbi Eliezer. So why is Rabbi Eliezer stringent? Keda Rav Yudah marav, damar Rav Yudah marav. Hiniach alehen uda shel sakin pesala ubegla ad shetimshoch ba. Maybe they're arguing about this law that Rav says, and Rabbi Eliezer is going to follow this opinion of Rav. Rav is later than Rabbi Eliezer, but there'll be an agreement. For Rav said that even if you just put a bundle of sacks on a cow, then it cannot be used anymore. Para aduma, and also the cow that's used for an egla arufa, neither of them can do work. They have to be the ones that never did any work. Now, what's called work? Well, certainly if you pull a plow, it's not going to be good. But for a para aduma, even if it put a bundle of sacks on it, of sacks is carrying something already, that's it. It worked. you cannot use it as a para aduma. But regarding an egla arufa, only if it actually pulls a load. Then it's a little harder work. Then it's no good. But if it just carries a few sacks of something on its back, then it's not yet prohibited. That's not a lot of work. Okay, so that's what I've said. Now, morsa bar cheshina, morsa bar lo cheshina. Now, do we worry about the non-Jew putting a sack of bundles? A bundle of sacks on the animal or not? Rabbi Eliezer, he worries about this opinion of Rav. Everybody actually agrees with Rav that you can't work an animal and you can't let it carry anything. But if you buy it from a Jew, you can ask the Jew. He says, no, it never worked. You can trust the Jew. But a non-Jew, Rabbi Eliezer will say, no, we suspect that he made it work because a non-Jew doesn't care. Whereas the rabbis say, no, I know it can't work, but the non-Jews know that also. And they're not going to make it work because they're raising it. They know that they're going to sell it for to be a para aduma. And so we don't worry that they're going to make it work. So maybe that's the essence of their machloket, and they're not arguing about whether we suspect them of bestiality or not. If bestiality is not the issue, but rather are they going to make it work or not. But we reject that. No non-Jew is going to make it work. For a little bit of benefit, in other words, even Rabbi Eliezer, who says it's prohibited, can't be for this reason. Because if the non-Jew is raising it to be a para aduma, so he knows it's going to be very, very valuable. The Jews will buy it for thousands of dollars. And so, how much benefit is it if he makes it carry a few bundles? How is that? $10? He's not going to lose out on $10 on thousands of dollars for a benefit of $10. And so we don't have to worry that the non-Jews are going to make it work. For sure, they are not going to make it work. So therefore, we go back to our original answer that Rabbi Pedat says, yes, in fact, the machloket is, Rabbi Eliezer agrees, would be the author of our Mishnah, and says, we don't entrust an animal with an innkeeper because we do suspect non-Jews of sinning, whereas the rabbis, they would be the author of the Baraita, that you can buy a sacrifice because we don't worry about it, and that's for the same reason that you can buy a para aduma from a non-Jew. Okay, so that we go back to our good answer. But we challenge it again. Well then, in the case of the animal, we should also say that for a little bit of benefit, a non-Jew is not going to lose out. In other words, regarding the para aduma, if you say that Rabbi Eliezer prohibits buying a para aduma from a non-Jew because we suspect him of bestiality, and bestiality with the para aduma is going to make it no good to use that animal for a para aduma, well then that's also, we could reject it for the same grounds. That what, do you think this non-Jewish owner, he's going to lose out thousands of dollars that he knows he can sell this para aduma for a little bit of pleasure of sinning with it? You say the same thing. So Rabbi Eliezer should not prohibit it. And we answer that, Hatam Yisro Tokfo. No. When it comes to sinning with the animal, his inclination may overcome him. When a person is inclined to commit a sin, even though he knows it's going to be really bad, it's going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars and a problem, but he can't overcome it. He's just overcome by desire. And so there, Rabbi Eliezer would say, yeah, in fact, we suspect that he's sinning. And so, yeah, we're back to our answer. It's true. In the case of just using it for a little bit of work to carry some bundles, there's no yetzat hara for that. You get another animal to carry your bundles or carry yourself. So a person's not going to risk a lot of money. But they may risk a lot of money if they have a yetzat hara for this. And therefore, we're back to our answer supporting Rabbi Pedat, that the Mishnah says, don't entrust. That would be Rabbi Eliezer, who suspects them, and also here suspects them regarding para aduma, and the Rabbanan, who says, no, we don't suspect them. They would follow but they would be the authors of the Baraita, that you can buy para aduma, just like you can buy other sacrifices from the non-Jews, because we do not suspect them of sinning with the animals. ודילמה דכולי עמא לך שינן לרביעה, והכה היינו תמד רבי Eliezer. And now we reject Rabbi Pedat's explanation once again. We challenge it, and we say, no, maybe, in fact, everybody agrees Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan do not suspect non-Jews of sinning with animals. And here, the reason that Rabbi Eliezer says that one cannot buy a para aduma from non-Jews is Kidetane Shela, is according to the Braita that Shela teaches. Shela. My tamad Rabbi Eliezer daber el bnei Israel v'yichu elecha bnei Israel yikuchu ve'en goyim yikhu. Maybe it's this braita that quotes specifically Rabbi Eliezer, and he quotes the pasuk regarding para aduma that says, "Go and instruct bnei Israel that they should go buy or acquire a para aduma." And we're revocalizing this yichu not as to buy but to sell. You have to revocalize as yakichu or something. So Bnei Israel should be the ones that are selling it, and the non-Jews you can buy it from a Jew, but you cannot buy it from a non-Jew. That's a gezerat hakatuv. Just a para aduma is to be always owned by a Jew. That's just the law. It's not because of bestiality, and so therefore maybe this is a local law that Rabbi Eliezer says only regarding para aduma has a special status. It cannot be owned by a non-Jew. But regarding other animal sacrifices, maybe Rabbi Eliezer is in agreement with that braita above that says you're allowed to buy other sacrifices from non-Jews. And we don't suspect them of bestiality. So we would reject Rabbi Pedat's answer. And we reject that rejection. So we're supporting Rabbi Pedat again. La sakadatech dekatani sefa. Vechen haya Rabbi Eliezer poseh bechol hakorbanot kula. No, you can't think that, because the continuation of this very braita here says that Rabbi Eliezer, not only did he say this law regarding para aduma, but he said the same thing regarding any sacrifice. One is not allowed to buy any sacrifice from a non-Jew. And so it must be that he is in agreement with he does suspect non-Jews of bestiality across the board, and he would be like the Mishnah and not like the Baraita. Now, if you would say that with like this rejection that Rabbi Eliezer agrees with the Baraita is the opinion of the Baraita of Shela, then okay, we understand that this would apply to a para aduma where it says the word kicha, so that we learn from that you have to buy it, b'nei Yisrael lichu, you have to buy it from a Jew. But it doesn't say this verb regarding all other korbanot, and so this derivation could not possibly apply to other korbanot. But yet Rabbi Eliezer says it regarding across the board, and therefore must be that Rabbi Eliezer does not say this only regarding is not following this derivation, but rather he says it across the board because he suspects the non-Jews of bestiality. And now we're going to challenge Rabbi Padat from the other way around. Maybe Rabbanan themselves would agree with Rabbi Eliezer and say that we do suspect the goyim of bestiality in general, and therefore you're not allowed to buy any korbanot from non-Jews, and so that would be against the braita that we're trying to reconcile with the Mishnah, and so maybe the rabbis would like to be able to reject that braita. And over here regarding para aduma, this is the only case in which they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and say you're allowed to buy a para aduma from a non-Jew. Why? Because the price is a lot, and therefore the non-Jewish owner is going to be careful, and he's not going to sin with it because he wants to get this tens of thousands of dollars that he knows that he can buy if he stays away from and does not sin with this cow. But regarding other korbanot, maybe he would agree. So this again rejects Rabbi Pedat. Rabbi Pedat wanted to say that the essence of the machloket between the Mishnah and the Baraita is along the lines of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan. And Rabbanan say we don't suspect, but according to this logic, maybe we do. Even according to the Rabbanan, they suspect the non-Jews of sinning except for para aduma. All right, but if we conclude this, or what we just said, then the Baraita above that says that one is permitted to buy animals from non-Jews and use them as a korban, who would be the author? La Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbi Eliezer, not Rabbanan. So it's nobody. Well, it can't be nobody. Somebody had to teach this Baraita. So therefore, by force, we have to say that Rabbanan are the authors of the Baraita, and they permit one to buy both a paraduma and any sacrifice from non-Jews because they do not suspect non-Jews of this sin. So that's one side. And then the Mishnah that says do not entrust an animal with an innkeeper, and he also says do not buy any animals. Not paraduma, not any other animals. All that is Rabbi Eliezer. Ve'od Tanya behedya, my oti bolech abroh Rabbi Eliezer, choson kedari kabsulach ya'alu l'rason amizbechi. And for we can prove that this is so, that the rabbis are lenient, because in yet another Braita, it says that the colleagues of Rabbi Eliezer responded to Rabbi Eliezer with a pasuk in Yeshaya that says, all the flocks of Kedar, this is Kedar's nomadic area where they grew the best animals, beautiful rams. It says, all the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered unto you, the rams of this play of Nevayot shall minister to you, and they shall come with acceptance upon my altar, meaning that all these non-Jews are going to come and say, here, take our animals, we want to sacrifice them, meaning that the animals owned by non-Jews are permitted to take as sacrifices, because otherwise how this pasuk wouldn't make sense. And so that's what the rabbi said, that we learn from here that according to Rabbanan, they say that we do not suspect the non-Jews of bestiality, and that's therefore one is permitted to buy animals from them, and therefore that applies to korbanot, and it applies also to paraduma. And so, in fact, as Rabbi Pidat says, the machloket between the Mishnah and the Baraita does parallel the machloket regarding the paraduma between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan. עד כאן לפליגי אלא בחששה, אבל היכא דוודאי רבעה פסלה. And now we are going to analyze the requirements for a para aduma, and we notice that the machloket is only whether we suspect that the non-Jews are going to sin with this cow that they may sell as a para aduma, where Rabbi Eliezer says, we suspect that they're going to sin with it, so you can't buy it. And the rabbis say, we do not suspect. However, let's say we know for sure that the person who raised the paraduma did sin with it, then for sure it would be invalid to use as a para aduma. Now let's try to figure out why. Shema amina de para kodshe mizbeachi di kadshe bet kabayit mimi pasela ba rebi'a. There are two types of sanctification. The higher type is kodshe mizbeach. That's an animal that is sanctified to be sacrificed on the altar, and that has a lot of special requirements. And then there is the lower level sanctification of something that is consecrated and donated to the Bet HaMikdash only for its monetary value. If it's the first type, then it has to be an animal, and it has to have no blemish, and it cannot be redeemed unless it gets a blemish. Whereas if it's Kodshe Bet HaKabayit, that could be anything. It could be an animal too. And that type of thing you can redeem for money. And even if it has a blemish, if it's an animal, even if it has a blemish, you can redeem it. So there are many differences and consequences between what type of Kedusha it is. Now we're trying to figure out, what about Para Aduma? On the one hand, it is similar to a korban in some ways. You do shechita on it, and the kohen takes some of the blood and sprinkles it towards the mizbeach. So there are some things, it's called a chatat, in fact. So in some ways, it's like a korban. However, it's fundamentally not a korban because it's slaughtered not in the Mishkan or in the Bet HaMikdash, but outside on Har HaZitim. And the blood is not brought to the altar itself and sprinkled onto the Mizbech, but rather only towards it. And the meat is not placed on the Mizbech, none of it. It's all burnt down to ashes. So it really is fundamentally different from a Korban. So now we're trying to figure out, it's Kedusha. When you designate here, this animal is going to be a Para Aduma, what kind of holiness does it get? Kodshe Mizbeach or Kodshe Bedek HaBayit? So let's try to derive from this fact that if it was involved in a sin, then it's pasul. Well, that would be true if it's kodshei mizbeach. So that proves that it's kodshei mizbeach, because if it was only kodshei bet hakabayit. Let's say you had an animal and somebody sinned with it. So now, so you want to donate this animal to the Bet HaMikdash just for its monetary value. That's fine. Doesn't matter. It could be anything that you're donating to its monetary value, and doesn't matter if it was involved in a sin. So doesn't that prove that the paraduma is in fact kodshei mizbeach? Because if it's involved in the sin, it's no good. We answer no. Shane para de chatat kariyeh chamana. Para is called a chatat, and that's why it has this extra prohibition that it can't be involved in the sin, because it in fact is called a chatat, but it doesn't mean that it's kodshei mizbeach. Maybe it's just something like kodshei bet hakabayit, but since it's called a chatat, so that's why it has some of the laws that are more stringent. Okay, if so, that if it's really called a chatat and it has the laws of a sacrifice, then it should be prohibited if it's born by a C-section. The law in general is that a korban, to be a valid korban, has to be born. The Torah says if an animal is born. But if that's born in a natural way, but if it's born out of a C-section, then it cannot be a korban. So now here, since para aduma, it is called a chatat, so therefore it's similar, has law similar to a korban. So maybe an animal that is born by C-section cannot be a para aduma. And if you say, yes, that's indeed so, a paraduma cannot be born of C-section. Then how come we have at least one opinion in this braita that permits it? The Tanakh Kama, in fact, says that a paraduma that is yotzei dofen means it came out of the side, not out of the womb, but rather a C-section, it's no good. Even if you made it holy as a paraduma, it's invalid. But Rabbi Shimon says it's okay. How could Rabbi Shimon say it's okay if you just said it's called a chatat, and so therefore should have the same laws of sacrifices? How could Rabbi Shimon permit? Rabbi Shimon amar Yosef Dofen Valad Ma'al Yahu Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan Modeh Rabbi Shimon Linyan Kodashim Sheno Kadosh. And if you say Rabbi Shimon says it's okay because he's following his own opinion, he's consistent. He says elsewhere that if something, he actually is talking about someone, a baby that is born out of a C-section, is called an offspring. And this is good. This is in Masechet Nida. The consequences here are for the laws of impurity of a woman who gives birth. So if she gives birth, she's going to be impure for 40 days or 80 days. Pure for 7 days, 14 days, and then another period of 40 days and 80 days, he can't come to the Mikdash. So is that true? Also, if she has a C-section, Rabbi Shimon says, yes, it is true. So if you think that Rabbi Shimon says that, just like that is called a birth, so too over here, for paraduma, C-section is called a birth, and that's why he permits it, and perhaps he permits it all the way for everything, for sacrifices too. But that is not true, because Rabbi Yochanan says, even Rabbi Shimon, who says regarding purity and impurity of a newborn mother, that a C-section is called being born, but when it comes to sacrifices, he agrees that it's not going to be holy, it's not consecrated. If it was a bechor, it would not be, if it was a firstborn, it would not be a firstborn, and cannot be used as a korban, and would not be good for a para aduma. So that can't be the reason why Rabbi Shimon says it's okay. It has to be that Rabbi Shimon says it's okay because he thinks that paraduma does not have to conform to other sacrifices. But we still now have a question. It says chatat, so how could Rabbi Shimon say that you can it's okay to use a paraduma that was born of a C-section? Rather, a para is different, that because a blemish is no good, a paraduma has to be perfect. Timima cannot have a blemish. So because that's true, so too, if it was involved in a sin of bestiality, or it was worshipped as an idol, as with Avoda Zara, that also becomes prohibited to it. So in other words, Rabbi Shimon says that it doesn't have all the laws of a korban, and so he doesn't agree that it has all the laws of korban. And so therefore, if it was born of a C-section, that's okay according to Rabbi Shimon. So and then how come if it's involved in a sin, it's no good? Before we said because it says pasuk chatat. That's okay for chachamim that say, yeah, it also can't be born of a C-section. It has to fit into the requirements of a korban. But according to the Bishimon, he says it can be yoseh dofin. It can be born from a C-section. So he will say, no, there's a different reason why if it committed bestiality, it's no good. Not because of it's called a chatat, but rather because it cannot have a blemish. And if it's involved in a sin or idol worship, then that's also called a blemish. It's a type of blemish, not a physical blemish, but a spiritual blemish. Tichtiv ki moshchatam bahem mumbam. In the section in Vayikra 22 where it's talking about blemishes in animals, it says you can't bring a blemished animal. And even a non-Jew cannot offer a animal that has a blemish in it to the Mishkan. Because it says their corruption is in them. Interesting word. Moshchatam, corruption, and it has a blemish. Let's talk about physical blemishes. As to the Pesukim before, talk about this. Limbs are a problem, or it's castrated. And so, why is it calling it Moshchatam, about corruption? Well, we know what this word means, because it's a braita, and it's from the school of Ishmael. Anytime it says the word hashchata, corruption, it's talking about sin or idolatry, sexual sin. And we know that it means that because the word edva is also said regarding the generation of the flood, where it says, all flesh has corrupted their ways on the earth. And that's referring to sexual sin. And it's also referring to idolatry, because another pasuk in Devarim says, lest you deal corruptly and make a graven image. You go patashchitun, same word as moshchatam, and that's referring to idolatry. And therefore, when it comes to para aduma, the Torah says has to be temima, and it cannot have a blemish. And since it cannot have a physical blemish, so too it cannot have this kind of spiritual blemish, and that's where we can derive that also if it was involved in bestiality, it would be prohibited, but not necessarily because it has kedusha of a korban, but rather just because of the obligation for it not to have a blemish. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.